The Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty is a protected landscape. It covers about 40% of this county, and it's one of the larger ones in the country. There are 37 in England. And they're landscapes that have been protected for their natural beauty so that people can enjoy them and so that that natural beauty can be passed on for future generations. And the natural beauty within them is not just natural, it's very much including man's part in that nature. And they're shaped by man, they're often rural landscapes, and they have a certain beauty and a suite of special qualities around which our conservation work hangs. An area becomes an area of outstanding natural beauty. There's a long designation process. This Dorset AONB was designated in 1959, and at the time there were a large number of AONBs and national parks being proposed at once in the Hobhouse Review, just after the 1949 Act of Parliament that led to their creation. And the definitions are somewhat lost in time, but they were areas in the 50s that were deemed to have not undergone great changes of industrial agriculture at the time, and they were felt to be the wilder and remoter places, parts of this country. They were also those parts that were wilder and remote, yet within reach of populations who could come out to enjoy it. Now is much more than the view. The view is obviously, visual aspects are important, but it's about how the landscape functions and how all of the elements of the landscape, so the wildlife, the built heritage, the stone walls or the hedges or the pattern of land, the pattern of settlement, how they all fit together, and the products that come from them, like the clean water, the clean food, hopefully clean food. This is all part of landscape, and it is all part of natural beauty. Beautiful landscapes are landscapes that function well and that create food without damaging the environment, that create ability to access and ability to reach clean air and clean water. Because beauty is a very human construct, so it's about how a landscape is productive for us and healthy for us. Into nature is part of that consideration, and the fact that humans are part of nature, I think, is important to understanding how that serves us rather than this separation. And looking at conservation effort across the country, the purposes we do that for is for ourselves. We may do it for conserving and enhancing nature, but we do that for benefit to ourselves, whether it is by cleaner landscapes or places for healthier recreation or species that may be exploitable or species that are an important part of a food web that we rely on ultimately. AONB is the designation itself is managed by a partnership of the local authorities and a number of other representative organisations, people from landowning and farming backgrounds, people from conservation backgrounds and people from the community. And this partnership is responsible for producing a management plan and oversees a small team that implements that plan. And that plan is all about how best we conserve and enhance the natural beauty of this place. Everywhere, it's all around us, urban landscapes, rural landscapes, and the development and the existence of areas of outstanding natural beauty as landscape areas is one of choice. They were picked and chosen to be conserved and enhanced, or that development may be different within them to ensure that natural beauty is kept for future generations. Landscapes are very various. Here in the Dorset AONB, the landscape is very varied. It's probably one of the most varied areas of outstanding natural beauty. The geology under our feet is incredibly varied, and that gives rise to different landforms and different soil types that different habitats and farming systems and ultimately settlement patterns then form from. So that underlying geology is very important to the shape and the form and the settlement of this land. In the landscape is a part of the character of that landscape, and it is to some extent dictated by that landscape, but to some extent dictated by what's happened in that landscape, conflicts or pressures. And the fact that in this country, and in Dorset in particular, many of the villages tend to be streamside and in the valleys, is something that we would promote in future developments. We wouldn't want to see the skylines and the hilltops being developed, because that would be against the current character of that landscape. The AONB partnership is concerned about conserving and enhancing natural beauty, and as I said, the landform and land shape and landscape comes from that geology beneath us, and where the geology meets the air, the soil is very important. So the soil dictates the habitat types, or the natural habitat that would form there, the chalk grasslands, the heathlands, the acid grasslands that are dotted all across this county, dependent on the geology underneath. These soils have been modified by agriculture and used very productively in some instances. And the health of those soils is critical to various things that come from the landscape, such as the clean water, such as the lack of damaging runoff or the soil loss that could come from it. So soil health is very important to what we get from this land, but as well as how it's very important to this land maintaining its benefit for the long term. So we are concerned about sustainable agriculture, and we are concerned about conserving soils, and we are concerned about using soils in a way that prolongs their productive capacity. Yep. Works with farmers through various organisations and projects. We have sponsored direct farm advice to promote conservation management, and we work with, as an example, and we work with the catchment partnerships as well to promote sensitive use of resources so that the rivers and estuaries can reach their ecological and legal requirements for clean water. These partnerships often produce forms of incentive and forms of encouragement, inducement to make choices that are about reducing fertilizer input or reducing pesticide input, or about careful management of those products and more careful disposal. And it's about encouraging choices that are about treading lighter on the soil and making sure that its productive capacity is prolonged to be damaging to runoff and water. And those are the legal hooks to use. But the AONB partnership has very little legal leverage, so how we work tends to be through inducement and persuasion, and bringing people along in partnership with us. We work with other agencies that have some legal leverage, like the Environment Agency, who are concerned about the cleanliness of water that flows from agricultural soils. And they are able to use that legal influence more impressively than we can. So conflicts tend not to arise with our work. What happens with our work is that before a conflict would arise, disengagement occurs. So we can only work through persuasion and incentive. And if people don't want to take those opportunities, then it's entirely within their choice. I haven't yet had conversations with farmers about the healthy product or the nutrition that they produce, and how producing it in certain ways can make food that is less nutritious than others. Often the choices that are made to produce food that is less nutritious than others are choices about productivity and choices about making cheap food. And cheap food, cheap to buy food is often food with hidden expense. It's food with environmental expense. It's food with health expense. And we pick those expenses up elsewhere. We pick those expenses up in our health budgets. We pick those expenses up through our water bills with the cost of cleaning water. So we haven't yet explored that with the farming community of Dorset. It's something I would quite like to do. And we need to start talking about farming for health. Farming for nutrition is, obviously our land use is about supporting the human way of life. And if what we are finding is that the products that are produced to be cheap and to be affordable for everyone are actually creating much greater cost and aren't giving us the nutrition that we need, then we need to think again about how we use that land. Natural beauty aren't barriers to development. They aren't blockers. It doesn't mean that no development can happen, but what should happen is that development should be shaped better or done more thoughtfully than in non-designated areas. We've seen in recent years huge pressure for large house building projects. This is very policy driven. It's a national government policy driver that housing numbers need to be increased hugely. And we've seen large allocations for housing being chosen and given permission within the area of outstanding natural beauty. To some extent, we have to recognise that the market towns need to grow and need to have space to grow. And we like to have some influence in the design of those developments to make sure that they're giving space for people to have recreational space. They're giving space for green infrastructure within the development, or that they are built at a density that means that they occupy less land. There are numerous choices to take there. But we have had to make some choices in the last few years about where is the least damaging place for growth to occur. And that's quite troublesome from a landscape conservation point of view. As far as development within areas of outstanding natural beauty goes, there are some legal hooks. There is a duty of regard that the local authorities must have. There's a duty of regard to the purposes of designation, that is conserving and enhancing natural beauty, when they are undergoing their duties, particularly that of managing development. And there is the National Planning Policy Framework, which says that scenic beauty must be safeguarded within areas of outstanding natural beauty. There are caveats around that. There are exceptional circumstances, cases that can be put forward, and the duty of regard for the purposes of designation within an AONB are often weighed up with the other policy drivers and how strong they are. And in the case of large-scale housing developments, unfortunately, it has come to be that the policy driver for development has overridden the policy driver for conservation and enhancement of natural beauty in particular places. And the need for towns to expand has overridden the fact that its hinterland is designated and protected.
It's madness.
It is madness. It is madness. But there is a balance to be struck, and I don't know. I mean, we're certainly not achieving that balance at the moment, but we do need towns to grow. We do need communities to be thriving. We can't fossilise places through conservation. But I'd dearly love to see some different radical proposals for housing that might be modular, very cheap builds, or they might be using materials that are much more longer lasting, so that the lifetime cost of build is reduced. And we've got to be able to build houses at unit costs that people can afford to live in and want to live in. I've got a background in rural England. I grew up in Norfolk in a rural community, and all of my first jobs were on the farms around that community. And I love rural England. I moved on to do an agriculture degree and then a sustainable agriculture degree, and worked on lots of other farms around, and had dreamt of becoming a farmer until the bitter reality of working on lots of farms kicked in. It's hard work, and access to land is very difficult. So the route that I could have taken to become a farmer just wasn't there. And the conservation profession was open and was developing, and it was closer to the land than any others that I knew of at the moment, and I went down the route of farm conservation advice, so being close to farmers and working out ways that they might conserve what they have and enhance what they have on their farm in terms of natural assets without disrupting their business too much, or by making business decisions that help conserve and enhance. And through that, I came to the world of protected landscapes. One of the things that really drives me is a desire for my children, my two daughters, to have the opportunities in the countryside that I had as a child, and the ability to have a bit of freedom to roam, the ability to disappear into woods or downland or marshes or whatever there is around, and for that to be reasonably safe, not a dangerous experience for them, any more than an adult entering into woods and marshes and that kind of habitat would be, and for it to be undamaged by the human activities around that. To see areas of landscape being built with houses that are anonymous or developments that are anonymous and could be anywhere, it's frustrating to see change that doesn't respect the character of the landscape, that doesn't reflect it. And it's frustrating to see change that is so commercially driven that the product is not good. Up to 50 years, maybe a bit longer, there have been a series of decisions taken in this country about how the land is managed that have enabled huge increases in productivity, huge increases in the weight of food that has been produced, and has led to profits among the farming and particularly the supply community, so the chemicals industry, the machinery industry, the hydrocarbon industry that provides the diesel that turns the soil. There have been large profits that have been made, but at what expense? So we have watercourses that are historically polluted, our seas are damaged, the soil is beginning to get to a state where it can bear fewer and fewer harvests without radical change. And these external costs are not being picked up by the generations that have profited, and will have to be picked up by future generations. And there's got to be a way that we have to start accounting for that cost now, so that we're not creating a huge burden for our children to pick up. The polluted watercourses, the damaged soil, obviously the changing climate, very much man-driven. There's a limited amount of things that we as an AONB partnership and an AONB small team can do, and we use what levers we have. And I think we really need a much more fundamental shift in government, in policy, and in the way we look at profit and how that is calculated, to be able to develop a society that can carry on in a way that doesn't punish future generations, carries on in a way that doesn't increase inequalities between people living in certain areas and others, or increase inequalities between the haves and the have-nots. It's increasingly clear that the system, the entire socio-economic system that has led to this boom in profit, this boom in productivity, yet the pushing of costs further down the road and further down into the future is broken, and that needs to change. Various new concepts such as natural capital accounting, that helps us understand the value that nature gives to us, the value that nature provides for our human health and well-being, and some tools to calculate its real financial value, so that can be brought into decision making, so that can be brought into financial planning. But still, there's a very much financial driven decisions to be made, and perhaps we need to be making decisions that aren't based on finance, that it's an easy metric to use for weighing up the cost of health against the profit to be made from cheap food, but perhaps we need to be making decisions that don't have that as its metric, that have something around human health and well-being as its metric. thinking about land use is political. It's channeled by policy, but it's also about rights of physical access to land, rights of being able to experience it and access it in physical terms, touch it, and come to see nature in its natural surroundings. But it's also about access to clean water. Even if you are an urban dweller, it's access to clean air. Those are public goods that we should expect, and public goods that land management has a huge influence over. And we need to be able to make sure that the managers of that land appreciate the effects in those terms. And to some extent, we need to make sure that they are adequately compensated for producing clean water, for producing clean air, for allowing people to experience nature and access land.